So the lovely Charlene and I returned just a few days ago from D.C. And it was an adventure. To say that I have some impressions is an understatement. I mean, first of all, I'll point out that she and I, my wife and I, have had some unique opportunities over the years to attend spectacular events, to even be present for what felt like history-making moments. I mean, we were there when Republicans took back Alabama's government after 136 straight years of Democrat control. We attended the balls and all the speeches. Other things like, I was there when U.S. troops destroyed al-Qaeda on the battlefields of Afghanistan, rode horses across the northern regions. I personally, during my tour in Iraq, handed a copy of the new Iraqi constitution to leaders of the newly elected government in Baghdad. Every once in a while, I've been able to stand next to heroes and leaders and preachers and politicians who were truly impacting culture and changing their times. At the same time, I'm not really prone to seek those moments out. I mean, they typically just involved being in the right place at the right time for the right reasons with the right people. But yeah, that trip to DC for the inauguration, that was something that I wanted to seek out. We both did. We wanted to be there. We wanted, like so many thousands of others, to just be in the nation's capital and watch history unfold. So we went, and it did not disappoint. I mean, to say that we were tired when we got back would be an understatement. I mean, hotel living ain't grand, right? Every Uber ride was apparently upcharged by double because they just could. Every street was also closed, which meant more than once we just had to tell our driver to let us out and we'd walk the last mile, which we did. Plans also changed on a minute-by-minute basis, it seemed like. I mean, we went to D.C. with tickets to two balls, the inauguration, the governor's prayer breakfast, the Trump rally on Sunday, and the victory parade, and we arrived to find out that everything had changed. The inauguration was inside, the rally and the parade were now first come, first serve, and the weather, wow, the weather made it all the more exciting. Was it cold? You better believe it was. Did it snow? Some. It also sleeted and rained while we were out walking around. And then the road closures. I mean, it felt like there was no rhyme or reason. We once walked 1.5 miles in freezing weather and sleet, only to find the last quarter mile was blocked by barricades that had all the crowds just like hemmed into the sidewalks. We could literally see the corner where our hotel was, but there was no way to get to it. And I finally had to walk up to the steel meshing fence that was like 8 to 10 feet high. And I called a police officer over. He came over to the gate and I asked him, I said, "How do I get to my hotel down there?" He looked around and he goes, "You didn't hear this from me, but go back the way you came for a block. They're about to barricade that intersection, and just step out on the road and walk with the cars." So we did just that. Acted like we owned the place, walked in the traffic lines, and made it back to the room in time just to watch the rally on TV. And by then, by the way, we were fine with that. We had one Uber driver that began asking me for directions. She was so frustrated trying to get through all the gridlock and barricades, I had to remind her she's the one who was from there, not us. I mean, security was unreal. Thousands of National Guard, police, Border Patrol, Secret Service, an unknown number of city workers all bundled up against the cold, manning every street corner and lamppost spot you can imagine. But aside from all of that, which could have been frustration, mounting on normal circumstances, aside from all of that, there was still kind of this magical feeling in the whole area. Everywhere you went, there were throngs of people wearing Trump hats and sweatshirts and MAGA jackets. There were outbreaks of spontaneous applause and people slapping on the backs and talking about how great everything felt. The air in D.C. was just different. And by the way, I've lived there before. I worked in the Pentagon. I've been in D.C. The mood was electric. And I wouldn't have missed it for the world. And in the midst of it all, there were some key memories that would not have been there had we not gone there. I mean, things like, we dressed up in our finery, went to mingle with crowds at formal balls, and enjoyed being among folks who were, like us, just glad to be present. We met with friends and colleagues and like-minded folks from Alabama for Governor Ivey's prayer breakfast, and praise and worship broke out while we were there, and that was cool. I hung out in the waiting area of a store, and I made a new friend from Alaska as both of our wives were shopping for clothes that we didn't know they needed, and compared notes on how our respective states were responding to the incoming new administration. And y'all, Alaska and Alabama are worlds apart, but we saw things the same. We connected with friends we hadn't seen in a while, had a great time laughing over an Italian dinner at Philomena's in Georgetown. And while we were there, half the restaurant broke out in chants of USA, USA. We were invited to go to the office of Congressman Robert Adderholt, he's one of the congressmen from our area, to a watch party for the inauguration itself. Since they had moved it indoors and we were no longer going to be on the Capitol Mall, this was a great opportunity, so we went and joined a small group at the congressman's office. And it wound up being one of the best moments of the trip as folks all stood and sat and sprawled out on his floor just to watch the swearing in of the new administration. Look, I'm going to be honest with you, that was so cool in that group watching that event happen live. The only thing I can compare it to is I was in a military chow hall headed to Iraq when the TV news broke in that we had captured Saddam Hussein. And that was the only time that actually beats the mood of what I just saw in the congressman's office. Spontaneous joy that breaks out when you hear an announcement on TV. So yeah, it was almost an emotional event as we all hung on every word of Trump's oath of office until the Chief Justice finally said, "Congratulations, Mr. President," and the room just broke out in cheers and laughter and high fives and handshakes. We hung around afterward, talked with folks, and then realized that right outside the window where I was standing in the congressman's office was Marine One, the helicopter, spooling up to take Biden away. To take Biden away. Let that sink in. So I filmed it on my camera from my perfect vantage point as Marine One, which technically wasn't even Marine One anymore, just on loan from the new president. It just lifted off and flew past the American flag and around the dome of the Capitol while I caught the moment on camera. It was like a bad dream coming to a fitting end. Like Scripture says, you will look and you will not find them. Yes, indeed. But the most significant thing for me out of all of it, though, was standing there listening to Trump deliver his acceptance speech, because he nailed it. He delivered a speech for the ages, and as I stood among other like-minded folks there in the congressman's office, I had to take notes. I mean, the points that flowed out in that one speech were everything we've been looking for. He promised God, country, family, and common sense were all coming back. He vowed that, quote, "the golden age of America starts now." In that speech, Trump pulled no punches. He said everything he wanted to say. He didn't care, by the way, who was sitting over there to his left, like Biden and Obama and the rest of them. He said what he wanted to say, and they tried to kill him. They tried to destroy his character. They tried to ruin his business. They tried to disrupt his family. They certainly tried to rebrand America in their own image. Why would he not stand there and say the things that he got to say in that speech? And in doing so, though, he appeared relaxed and resolute. Now, some of the key points he delivered them with such emphasis, and then he would just stare at the audience, which was like a "I'm not kidding" kind of moment. He called out the southern border. He called out the weaponization of government. He called out lawfare. He called out economic ruin. He said that the turnaround time begins right now. He called for unity, and I love the fact that he said, "and we will not forget our God." He labeled it all as the revolution of common sense. And what made it all the more enjoyable is that Biden and Harris looked absolutely miserable sitting right over there to his left side the whole time he spoke. He went on to say in his speech that it's time once again to act with a vigor of being the greatest nation. He said, "We will not be deterred. We will not pursue anything less than perfection. We will pursue our manifest destiny into the stars. We will pursue planting the American flag on the planet of Mars." He remarked on the history of what it took to even build this country. Everything from westward expansion to the splitting of the atom and the launching of mankind into the heavens. If we work together, he said, there is nothing we cannot do and no dream we cannot achieve. In America, he said, the impossible is what we do best. It just kept getting better. But his closing quotes in that speech were perhaps the most electric, as Donald Trump said, quote, "After all we have been through together, we stand on the verge of the 4 greatest years in American history. We will revere the nation we love. We are one people, one family, and one glorious nation under God. So to every parent who dreams for their child and every child who dreams for their future, I am with you," he said, "and I will win for you, and we're going to win like never before." And then he added, this is great, he added this, he said, "America will be respected again and admired again, including by people of religion, faith, and goodwill. We will be prosperous. We will be proud. We'll be strong. We will win like never before. We will not be conquered. We will not be intimidated. We will not be broken, and we will not fail. And from this day on," he said, "the United States of America will be a free, sovereign, and independent nation. We will stand bravely. We will live proudly. We will dream boldly, and nothing will stand in our way because we are Americans. The future is ours," Trump said. and our golden age has just begun. So yeah, did we come back from that trip tired? Darn right we did. And I'd do it again. This was history, my friends. This was real history. And we're right smack in the middle of it right now. So bring on the golden age of America, I say. Let's do this. And y'all, it hadn't even been 2 weeks since that speech. I mean, since that time, the change agent in the White House has spawned more positive activity than the Biden administration dreamed of doing in the past 4 years. I mean, I guess, truthfully, the Biden administration did make a lot of change, but none of it good from my perspective. But the new Trump administration came into office and immediately set about keeping promises that had been made during the campaign and in that inaugural speech. Like, for instance, Marco Rubio was the first of the new cabinet members sworn in. No surprise. I think he's a great choice. He immediately put a ban on DEI in the State Department. He made sure that every State Department entity, embassy, and outpost knew that the State Department will no longer be flying gay pride flags and BLM flags. Rubio also announced his first foreign trip as Secretary of State will be to Panama. You may recall President Donald Trump has said he wants to take the Panama Canal back. His argument is that the critical waterway that is currently under the control of China. Both China and Panama have denied any interference, in the operations of the canal, which is operated as a neutral waterway ostensibly. Okay, maybe. But even the liberal media admits that Chinese-based companies have an outsized operational control under contract to the Panama Canal Authority. And U.S. ships, including naval vessels, are getting charged an inordinate amount to traverse the waterway where 40% of all U.S. shipping commerce goes through, both export and import. Think about this. If a hot war broke out with China, it would have a devastating effect if for even a short while we were denied right of passage through the Panama Canal. Our economy, our ability to project military power, all of it. So Rubio is headed to Panama as his very first foreign trip, and he said of all of that, he said this, an argument can be made, Rubio said, that the terms under which the canal was turned over have been violated. He said, while technically sovereignty over the canal has not been turned over to a foreign power, in reality, he said, a foreign power today, China, possesses through their companies, which we know are not independent, the ability to turn the canal into a choke point in a moment of conflict, and that, he said, is a direct threat to the national interests and security of the United States. How refreshing it is, by the way, to hear somebody say, that's not good for America and we're going to fix it. Because that's basically what just got said. One of the other immediate change agents who got to work right away is Tom Homan as the border czar. Love that guy. Within the first 2 days of Trump's administration, 2 days, ICE agents nationwide conducted raids and took over 530 illegal immigrant criminals into custody. Let that sink in. By the way, let it also sink in that for those raids to happen that fast and that accurately, that the investigative files were already in their hands. They had obviously not been given the go-ahead to conduct the raids until Trump took office. Think about that. The Biden administration knew where these bad guys were and would not do anything about it. But ICE already had the files. All they had to do was get somebody to say go. These are violent criminals, gang members, some with terror ties, some who had been deported multiple times and snuck back in. And we apparently knew right where they were, and we couldn't go get them until Trump said go. That's pretty sick if you get down to it. But Homan got busy. And there are the usual hand-wringing liberal politicians who are screaming racism already. But the roundup has begun and the first deportation flights have already occurred. The Trump administration has already taken steps to secure the border, including deploying the military, restarting wall construction, and ending the previous administration's parole programs. And as I sit here right now recording this podcast, the new Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, was just sworn in a few hours ago, and she's getting to work immediately. Noem was sworn in by Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, and she said this in a statement. She said, quote, "The Trump administration will once again empower our brave men and women in law enforcement to do their jobs and remove criminal aliens and illegal gangs from our country." And she went on to say, "We will fully equip our intelligence and law enforcement to detect and prevent terror threats, and will deliver rapid assistance and disaster relief to Americans in crisis." Y'all, it is a whole new day. Can I get an amen? But look, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the other nominee who was just confirmed in the last 24 hours was Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense. Hegseth, he survived a close vote with 3 Republicans, including former Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, voting against him. But Vice President J.D. Vance provided the tie-breaking vote, and Hegseth was sworn in right away. It was something to watch him take the podium and immediately give all glory to God. He said, turning to his wife Jenny too, he said that it was Jesus and Jenny that he had to thank more than any on the road to get to that position. He also cracked a great joke when he looked over at Vice President Vance and he said that once again an enlisted Marine bailed out an Army officer. But I will admit, I was dubious about Hegseth when I first heard about his nomination. But I'm all in now, man. I am. The more I look at his resume and his very open and vocal positions and his lack of ties to the defense industry, well, the more I'm convinced that he's going to return the DoD to a place where the troops matter most. So let me spend a few minutes talking about that, about the troops mattering most and about what leadership can do to make them feel that way. Because I'm going to tell you right now, that's going to drive recruiting. It's going to drive morale. It's going to drive combat readiness. It's going to drive the ability of our U.S. military to deter and defeat our future enemies if they know that their back is had by their leadership. So many of you know that the Army has been a multi-generational thing for me and my family. My grandfather, my father, my uncle, myself, and now my son all served as Army officers. My grandfather, he retired as a brigadier general, a glider rider in World War II, served up through Korea and Vietnam. My father, a career man who had 2 highly decorated tours in Vietnam and retired as a lieutenant colonel. Myself, 30 years of service, airborne ranger, tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, the Pentagon. And my son, now a major on active duty. It's a big thing for me. It's a major thing for this country. I believe that we have been through a dark time for our armed forces. Morale and recruiting has been an all-time low. I've talked about it here before. It's largely because, in my opinion, the Biden administration saw troops as just tools. They saw troops as petri dishes for social experimentation. They made decisions that did not have the troops' well-being in first place. But I believe that's going to change now. I believe it has to. So of all the nominees, some of which still have to go through their hearings and floor votes, Hegseth is the one that has the most personal feel to me. Because in his confirmation hearing, Hegseth heralded the end of wokeness, the end of DEI, and the streamlining of the bloated defense bureaucracy. But most importantly, though, Hegseth said, and he said it again during his swearing-in speech, that his focus will be on the individual soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that would serve under him. And that, listen, my friends, that was a breath of fresh air. Those young men and women who serve our nation in uniform, who volunteer to go to hard places and do hard things, they deserve a leadership that has their back. A leadership that takes responsibility and will be accountable for mistakes and give credit to the actual warfighters when it goes well. But as I thought about all this, I couldn't help but reflect in a very personal way. The lessons that I've learned about taking care of troops. See, I've been downrange and I've had times when it felt like nobody in the rear knew what was going on out where I was. Asinine orders and directives that made someone at the headquarters feel good about themselves fell flat when they were sent out to the front lines where I was. As the war in Afghanistan started, I found myself deploying immediately. 9/11 happened. 90 days later, I was headed out to take a team to the far reaches of the Afghan theater where we lived among the Afghan people for nearly a year. But just before I left to mob out of Fort Bragg, I had a visitor, a legendary Green Beret, an awardee of the Medal of Honor. His name was Ola Lee Mize. Colonel Mize came to see me one day right before I left. He walked into my office unannounced. And listen, when Colonel Mize wants to see you, everything stops and you see him. The man had fought in Korea and 3 tours in Vietnam. He was one of the founders of the Special Forces School and the Combat Diver School. And besides the Medal of Honor, he also wore the Silver Star, 5 Bronze Stars for Valor, and the Purple Heart. But what got me was, and I've seen it, man, I have. What got me was how anyone who had ever served under him seemed to just revere him. I once attended a special ceremony for Colonel Mize, where men came from all over the nation to honor him, men who said they owed him their lives and would follow him anywhere. Colonel Mize, he walked into my office that day in December of 2001, and he sized me up for a minute. And he shut the door to my office, and he stood there a few seconds, and he said, "Williams, I hear you're going to the war." I said, "Yes, sir." He nodded and he said, "Where you going to be?" I told him I didn't have my assignment yet, but that I understood I was going to be out on a remote team. He nodded again, and he got real serious, and he said, "Let me tell you something. Going to come the day you're going to be out there with your men, and some blankety blank in the rear is going to tell you what to do, and you're going to know it ain't right. You tell him go to hell. You take care of your men." I mean, what do you say to that? I just said, "Yes, sir." He shook my hand and he said, "All right, you do good now." He turned around and walked out. I have never forgotten that. And I leaned on that advice several times since then. You take care of your men. That sentiment is what I hear in Hegseth right now, as he so avidly, so passionately speaks about being there for the troops, restoring morale, rebuilding capabilities, removing obstacles, and awarding actual merit. Look, I want this for the current generation, to include my son, to have the best weapons, the best choices, the best training, the best leaders, the best experiences. My hope is for our U.S. military that this morale and leadership will pour over into our society too. See, by and large, I believe that America still loves its troops. I mean, we do. They deserve it. But leadership from D.C. makes a difference coming down. And my sincere hope is that returning a policy of peace through strength will also mean that society follows suit. In a strong way, like all of society following suit to love on our troops and make them know it. Sitting on my desk in the Rightside studio, I have Ted Nugent's autograph that I got in Baghdad in 2004 when he and Toby Keith came over to play for the troops. It just meant the world that they would come over and do that. There are still stars and celebrities who will go where the troops are and bring them some relief and entertainment when they're far from home. But how many really do what they can to honor them? Like Hegseth said, to really honor them. See, leadership in D.C., and now it's Hegseth's turn, can actually ask for that. Leadership that cares about the troops will actually reach out to celebrities and ask them to please go over there and do what you can do and tell the young men and women they're important and they're not forgotten. I don't believe that kind of focus on troops has been there the past 4 years. Nobody's been pressing Hollywood and celebrities to go see soldiers. But there was a time when they lined up to do it. Bob Hope spearheading the USO show. Troops knew that when they were over there that America would still come to see them and remind them of home. And one of the best of those was John Wayne. I remember when I got back from my first tour overseas in Afghanistan, I was demobbing at Fort Bragg again. On one of those Sunday mornings that we were there demobbing, I decided I was going to church, and I took a short walk over to what is known as the Special Warfare Chapel, the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Chapel. If you're ever at Fort Bragg, which is currently called Fort Liberty, that's going to change. I encourage you to check out the Swick Chapel. It's a full-size church. The stained glass windows are beautiful and they depict soldiers kneeling in prayer on the battlefield. But standing in front of the chapel is a granite monument about, maybe 5 feet high. And it says on it, "In tribute to the men of the Green Berets, U.S. Army Special Forces whose valiant exploits will inspire mankind." In a very small script, right along the bottom, right there at the base, it says, "Presented by John Wayne, July 4th, 1968. You gotta love that, man. Green Berets, John Wayne, and Jesus all in one place. John Wayne loved troops. The year before that monument, Wayne had released his epic film called The Green Berets. Critics hated the movie. Roger Ebert said the film was cruel and dishonest. The New York Times said it was rotten and false. War protests were underway back in the States, but troops were overseas fighting and dying, and John Wayne wasn't going to make an anti-war movie. He told a story that the troops loved. That movie made them proud. It did honor to their sacrifices. But he also didn't stop there. Wayne went and visited the troops in Vietnam multiple times. One of the written accounts of his time with soldiers said, quote, "The soldiers felt this giant hand come down on their shoulder and a voice saying, 'Hello, soldier. I'm John Wayne. I just want you to know there's a hell of a lot of folks back home appreciate what you're doing.' And some of them would just break out in tears. Troops would actually write him letters thanking him for being one of them, and he would write back and tell them the letters meant more than they could ever know. John Wayne once said, 'I cannot sing or dance, but I can certainly talk to the kids.' The point is, it was not about him. It was not about him personally. It was about them. It was about what Pete Hegseth told the nation in his confirmation hearing. It was about what Colonel Mize said to me right before I left for Afghanistan. You take care of your men. You make sure they know that they're more important than anything else. that we know and appreciate the fact that all the gee whiz firepower in the world, all the technology, all the strategy, all the muckety mucks in the Pentagon, they don't mean anything more than the men or women who put their boots on the ground. So that's a lot, man, in 10 days. We've got that much. We got that much stuff going on. We've got things already happening to restore our border. We've got any number of things happening to restore our standing on the world stage in foreign policy and in things that put America first. And we've certainly got a new day and a change agent in the Pentagon, who I believe, and I am hopeful, and I'm ready to see it, I believe is going to bring a new level of morale and care for our troops. I want that for my son. I want it for your sons and daughters and the next generation after that. I want to return to the halcyon days of duty, honor, and country and putting the troops first. So yeah, overall, I give the first 10 days of the Trump 47 administration an A+. Nominees are still being confirmed. Work is still left to do. New challenges will arise, I know that. But our border's back, our security is front and center, U.S. interests now in first priority, and the troops are going to be cared for. And I'm for it. I'm for all of it, and more of it. So let's do this. That's my philosophy.